Okay, let's just dive right in. 40 million SIM cards.
Yeah.
That's the number Globacom registered
Yeah.
that were then flagged as, well, unverified.
It's a staggering figure, isn't it?
It really is. It's like planning a huge party and then realizing you didn't actually send out any real invites. So the big question is, how does a company that started out so strong, such a disruptor, end up in this kind of regulatory tangle?
Exactly. And that's what we're trying to unpack today. We're not just looking at the company timelines or the financials. We're looking at the people.
The CEOs, right. The individuals who were actually, steering these massive ships in Nigeria's pretty turbulent telecom waters, their personalities, their backgrounds.
Precisely. Think of it less like history class and more like, well, understanding the captains. We've got news reports, public statements, all sorts of clues to piece together who these leaders were and how their specific way of doing things shaped the whole company.
Right. So for you listening, maybe you're running your own thing, or maybe you just find these big business stories fascinating. We're trying to connect the dots. Find those aha moments that show how leadership really makes or breaks things. It's kind of the shortcut to understanding why some companies soar and others stumble.
And it's important to say this is based on what's publicly out there, news, statements, records. Leading these kinds of companies is incredibly complex.
Always more to the story.
Always. So consider this our best take based on the information we could gather.
Okay, so let's start with Globacom. And the man behind it all, Mike Adenuga Jr., often called a reclusive telecom mogul. That description alone paints a picture, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Yeah.
Sort of an enigmatic figure. And when Glow launched back in 2003, the mission seemed pretty clear, almost simple on the surface. Deliver high-quality mobile service, but make it low cost.
A powerful promise. And sources like This Day Live credit his visionary leadership and tenacity for making that happen early on.
Yeah, and you have to remember the context. Per second billing. That was Glow.
Oh, absolutely. A huge deal back then.
The Nation newspaper said Glow democratized access to telephony for millions by doing that. It wasn't just a pricing strategy. It fundamentally changed the market.
And you see praise even from political figures like President Tinubu citing his vision, resilience, and hard work, and also his humility and diligence. So a picture of someone intensely focused, driven.
Definitely driven. But then there's the other side of the coin. TechPoint Africa talks about his very hands-on controlling style, saying he maintains tight control over operations and that his personal business interests and the company's management are, let's say, very closely linked, almost inseparable.
It makes me think of like a master craftsman, obsessed with every single detail, which is great for quality, maybe, especially at the start. That Glow Loves Nigeria campaign really landed.
It did. But what happens when the operation gets huge? Can one person realistically keep that level of minute control?
And maybe that's where the problems start. Like that 2024 SIM registration issue, over 40 million unverified. Is that the consequence?
Well, TechPoint Africa seems to think so. They explicitly link it to a lean governance structure that just wasn't keeping up with modern regulatory demands. So you have this powerful singular vision hitting the wall of complex modern regulations.
And the family connection is still very strong, right? His daughter, Bella Disu, she's been executive vice chairman since way back in 2004.
And her public statements really echo his focus on excellent service delivery, quality, innovation. It reinforces that centralized feel.
It does. So even with philanthropy and international awards like the Légion d'honneur, the company's identity seems deeply tied to Adenuga himself.
Absolutely. Which makes the recent news that CEO suddenly leaving in January 2025 and the talk about setting up a more formal board quite interesting.
A potential shift.
Potentially, but you get the strong sense that Adenuga's imprint, as the sources call it, isn't going away anytime soon. His influence remains profound.
Okay, so that's Adenuga the visionary, but with that tight grip, let's switch completely. Fatuma Leko at MTN, starting in 2002, feels like a totally different narrative.
Oh, completely. Now, Leko came in an engineer-turned-finance guy with this really grand vision. He wanted to build MTN into Africa's mobile operator of the future.
And the numbers under his leadership are just wow.
Right. Subscriber base explodes from relatively small to 185 million across 22 countries. Revenue over $15 billion a year. Market value soaring. Its ambition on a massive scale. And he actually pulled it off.
That's incredible growth. And his leadership style sounds like the polar opposite of Adenuga's, described as team-oriented, decisive, and objective-driven, but with a real emphasis on listening and consensus.
That collaborative aspect seems key. Sources talk about his knack for bringing together really diverse markets, Nigeria, Uganda, even Iran, into one coherent strategy. But crucially, doing it while emphasizing local empowerment.
Not just imposing one way of doing things.
Exactly. It was about building a shared vision across different cultures and contexts, and respecting the local situation seems vital.
There's that university citation, right, from Nelson Mandela University.
Yeah, it credits him with making emerging markets a logical destination for investors, precisely because he respected that local context. That's a huge insight. Growth wasn't just expansion, it was smart, context-aware expansion.
So he's negotiating MTN's entry into places like Nigeria and Ghana, balancing that push for growth with playing by the local rules.
Skillfully, by all accounts. And when he moved to non-executive chairman in 2011, it felt like a move to institutionalize that strategy, to weave those values, innovation, collaboration, community, respect, into the company's fabric.
And him later chairing the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. That says a lot about his broader influence, doesn't it?
It really does. It shows his principles weren't just for MTN. They were about building a better business environment overall. The university linking his traits to Nelson Mandela's values speaks volumes too. It's business with a bigger picture in mind.
Okay, so fast forward a bit. MTN hits a rough patch with that huge Nigeria fine. And in 2017, Rob Shooter comes in.
Right, a very different context. Reuters called it a troubled era. Shooter's job was basically fix the credibility problem and drive the next phase, digital innovation.
And he had serious international experience, Vodacom, Vodafone. Sounds like he brought a global, maybe more corporate approach.
Definitely execution focused.
Yeah.
He looked at finance, operations, but also corporate culture, inclusion. He talked a lot about the mobile industry's role in driving digital and financial inclusion. He even taught MBA courses on strategy and culture, which tells you something about his analytical style.
And that fintech push was massive under him, wasn't it? Momo, the mobile money arm.
Huge. Aggressively scaling Momo, getting massive user numbers and transaction volumes by late 2023. That shows a leader seeing where the world was going, beyond just calls and data.
Adapting to the digital shift.
Absolutely. And seeing mobile tech as the tool for broader economic upliftment. His involvement in things like the UN Broadband Commission shows that belief in public-private partnerships, too.
And he wasn't afraid to make big moves, like cementing MTN's position in Nigeria with partnerships, tackling fraud, and that public apology back in 2016 meeting President Buhari. That was about rebuilding trust, wasn't it?
It signaled a real commitment to changing how MTN operated, improving governance, which eventually led to listing on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, the JSE equivalent there.
So his style seems pragmatic but still very ambitious. Growth, yes, but balanced with community needs and fixing past issues.
I think that's a good summary. Relentless growth, but with that broader context in mind. When he left in 2020, MTN definitely had a stronger digital platform and a clearer story about its positive economic impact.
Which leads us neatly to today. Carl Toriola heading MTN Nigeria and, well, the ongoing situation at Globacom. Toriola took the reins in 2021 right into the teeth of this brutal economic storm in Nigeria.
Yeah, brutal is the word. Inflation, the Naira's devaluation, energy costs.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly tough operating environment. Toriola, who came up through MTN's ranks, an engineer by background, seemed to be taking a very resilient, data-driven approach.
He described MTN Nigeria's performance as resilient despite persistent macroeconomic pressures, emphasizing operational agility.
And we saw that agility, or perhaps necessity, with that controversial 50% tariff hike. He was very blunt about it.
Extremely blunt, saying it was essential for the survival of the telecoms industry, even admitting we're on our knees financially. That's direct.
Very direct communication. Necessary, perhaps, in that climate. And while that accidental 200% data price hike wasn't great, the quick apology showed some accountability.
So the focus now is on efficiency, cost-cutting, but also looking ahead. 5G trials, more fintech.
Exactly. Balancing the immediate crisis with long-term strategy. And you also see pragmatism in how they're working with competitors and the government on things like the SIMN registration deadlines, navigating compliance while trying to manage customer impact.
Okay, so now let's pivot back to Globacom's current leadership. It still feels like Mike Adenuga's shadow looms large, even with recent changes.
That's definitely the sense you get. That sudden CEO exit early in 2025 certainly caused a stir, and there was talk of a more formal board structure being put in place.
But Adenuga's influence remains.
All signs point to yes. He and his core team still seem to be the primary drivers of the company's direction.
And Beladisu is still very visible, promoting the Powering Your Ambition mission, linking it back to her father's original vision.
And there's mention of Ajay Sanwo-Liu as a group executive, but not much public detail, suggesting he's likely operating under that established Adenuga guidance.
So Globacom's messaging is still about continuity, innovation, the things Adenuga championed.
Pretty much. But they can't ignore the external realities either. The pressure for stricter KYC, the NIN processes, that's forcing operational changes on everyone, including them.
So it's kind of a hybrid situation developing. Adenuga's traditional control may be blending with some newer technocratic roles.
It seems that way. Fascinating dynamic to watch. How do they navigate the future regulatory landscape while holding on to those founding principles? That's the big question for Globacom.
Definitely. So, wrapping this up, we've seen these incredibly different leadership styles, haven't we? Adenuga's intense, centralized vision, powerful but maybe hitting limits.
Then Releco's collaborative Pan-African expansion model. Schroeder coming in to stabilize, rebuild trust, and push digital. And now Toriola and the current Glo team navigating today's really tough economic and regulatory climate.
It really drives home how much a CEO's background, their personality, their whole approach isn't just corporate fluff. It fundamentally shapes a company's path, its wins, and its vulnerabilities.
Absolutely.
So as you're listening, think about these models, the visionary, the collaborator, the pragmatist. How do you see these playing out in other fields? What kind of leadership do you think works best in the world we're in now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if this deep dive into Nigeria's telecom leadership gave you some useful insights, let us know. We're always curious about what other industries or maybe leadership styles you'd find interesting for us to tackle next time.